The most daunting thing about mountains is not their height, their steepness, or their slopes. It's that when you're face to face with one, it doesn't seem like it can be moved. In life, you're going to come up against many mountains, but you're not alone. Have you been commanded? Have you not been told? Be strong, be courageous. Your God will be with you wherever you go.
Good morning, Bridgeway. My name is Christian Sapp. I am the North Carolina Church Plant resident, and today we're going to start off with a little bit of participation. Show of hands, who struggles with road rage? Come on, you have to be honest. You're in church. You can't lie about it. I'm guilty. If you ask my wife, I'm probably the guiltiest party in the room right now. And so one day we're heading down the interstate, and this jerk behind, this guy, this individual behind me is tailing me, and he whips around me, and he gets in my lane, and he slams on his brakes, and so I have to swerve into the other lane to avoid hitting him. And I pull up alongside him. We share some American Sign Language, a few choice words. I wasn't a Christian yet. And he makes this obscene gesture towards my wife. And so it was on. And I start signaling for him to get off the interstate on this ramp that we are coming upon. And he does. And so we start swinging off the interstate. And we pull over, and I am ready to just duke it out with this guy that, for all I know, is a black belt in some like crazy militant fighting style. But I don't care. I gotta defend the honor of my wife. And so I go to open the door, and she grabs my arm. And she looks me dead in the eyes, and she says, "If you get out of this car, I'm done. We are done." See, she didn't like my road rage. Big surprise. And I loved her, and so I knew, at least for a while, the appropriate thing was for me to hand over the keys to her, let her drive. Guys, nothing felt less manly at first than being drove around everywhere by your wife. Now, Jeff wanted to say, hey, the last manly thing is the man cave. No, driving is the last manly thing, and now I had been relegated forever to the passenger seat. In the worst part was going out to dinner with your friends, right? And you get done with dinner and you're walking back to the car, the men to the driver's seat, and me to the passenger seat of my wicked sweet minivan. To be honest, it was terrifying at first. I spent a whole lot of time doing some backseat driving and struggling with heart palpitations, living in this constant state of fear that I'm going to die. I'm kidding. My wife is a great driver. The funny thing is, though, that's so typical of fear. When we live in this constant state of fear, when we hand the keys over to fear and say, hey, you drive. Whether that's a fear of physical danger or by a perceived threat, it's incapacitating. It leaves us paralyzed. Fear gives us this sense of distress where we're just holding on to that handle, not knowing what we will ever do. Fear, it comes to the driver's door, and it opens up the door, and it takes you by the hand, and it'll walk you around the car, place you in the passenger seat, get back in, look at you and say, buckle up, because fear has it from here. What about fear, though, drives us to do things that we wouldn't normally do? What effect does fear have on the brain? Fear is described as this unpleasant emotion caused by the belief that someone or something is dangerous, likely to cause pain, or is a threat. Have you ever experienced fear? Or better yet, have you ever experienced what you perceive? I think that Elijah was making a promise, but I believe that God was intending to make a point to Ahab. As surely as God lives, the God of Israel, before whom I stand in obedient service, the next years are going to see a total drought, not a drop of dew or rain unless I say otherwise. But why? Why this grandiose entrance of Elijah dropping a holy fist on King Ahab? Well, the Bible tells us why. Just 4 verses before Elijah enters the equation, the Bible tells us in 1 Kings 16:30, but Ahab, son of Omri, did what was evil in the Lord's sight, even more than any of the kings before him. Woo! Ahab, you done messed up. But it doesn't end there. He goes off and he marries Jezebel. You guys remember that she's bad news, right? Like really bad news. I mean, for crying out loud, she becomes a representation of what nobody ever wants to be called. And guess what? She don't worship God. And men, if we can agree on anything, it's that a happy wife equals a happy life. So guess who else now worships Baal? Like I said, though, it doesn't end there. Ahab is what we would call a go big or go home type of guy. So still in chapter 16, but verse 31 through 33, and he began to bow down in worship of Baal. First, Ahab built a temple and an altar for Baal in Samaria. But even worse, he went on and built a shrine to the sacred whore Asherah. Pardon my French, those were the Bible's words, not mine. He made the God of Israel angrier than all the previous kings of Israel put together. What a thing to be known for in the Bible. This guy was straight up a champion of evil. He went all out when it came to rebuking the Lord. Rebellion and heresy were at an all-time high. And God is a God of action, not false promises. Now, one person's actions have drove scarcity for all. One person's action has caused this pronounced sense of fear. A fear of not knowing where their next meal would come from. A fear of not knowing if there would be anything to quench their thirst with. And in scarcity, fear only becomes bigger than we can possibly see past. But hold on. The thing is, this story isn't even about Elijah. This story isn't even about King Ahab. But we choose, for some reason, to focus on the foreground characters of a story. The real story I want to share with you today is about a courageous widow. A widow who refuses to let fear drive her around any longer. And if we hop back in the story, starting in verse 10, we meet that protagonist. So he, Elijah, got up and went to Zarephath. As he came to the entrance of the village, he met a woman, a widow, gathering firewood. He asked her, "Please, would you bring me a little water in a jug? I need a drink." And as she went to get it, he called out, "And while you're at it, would you bring me something to eat?" This isn't a normal ask of a normal person. This isn't just any other person who had very little during a famine. This was a widow. And widowed women were known as the poorest people of all society. And as Jeff alluded to, this was a broke, bankrupt, worn-out woman who barely had enough to feed her child one last time. This drought is thought to have lasted for at least 3 years. Many translations read like this. In 1 Kings 18, verse 1, after many days, the word of the Lord came to Elijah in the 3rd year, saying, "Go show yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain upon the earth." Now, we don't know if this was his 3rd year in living with the widow, or if this also was 3 years, including the time he was hanging out by the Jordan River, eating food that was brought to him by birds. But we do know this. What we do know is that is a long time without rain regardless. That widow and her son had been living on scraps for a long time. And as far as she knew, that wasn't changing today. But what did change today is things got worse. At least in her eyes. Someone wanted to impose on that. Someone wants some of her little. Someone is impeding on her ability to possibly feed both her and her son now. She could easily see Elijah as a threat. I mean, she was already stuck in fear. And now here is some strange foreigner wasting what little energy she has left, wanting a piece of her little. And how did she respond to such a request from Elijah? She responds the same way every single one of us in here would respond in a moment of scarcity. Verse 12 said, I swear as surely as your God lives, I don't have so much as a biscuit. I have a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a bottle. You found me scratching together just enough firewood to make a last meal for my son and me. After we eat it, we'll die. And the thing is, at the moment she responds to Elijah, she's letting fear drive that car. She is sitting passenger to fear, holding onto that handle, incapacitated by it. And we see the possessiveness of fear. See, rain may have come tomorrow. Maybe the Lord was waiting for just one act of kindness. Everything could have been better tomorrow. But fear, it keeps us bound in that immediate moment. And in the moment, all we know is we have just a little. Just enough for one last meal. And I can't share it with you because it's all I have. And if I give to you, then I have no more. And fear, it only thinks of the me's and the I's. You hear it in her words. I mean, she's telling of the possessiveness of fear in everything she says. I don't have so much as a biscuit. I have a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a bottle. That's a leave me alone cry if I've ever heard one. Go away. As a parent, you want nothing more than to provide for your children. You want to care for them. You want to give them a better life than you had or that you experienced. And in her mind, here she is failing at that. She can't even keep her son alive. You heard her. Continuing in verse 12. You found me scratching together just enough firewood to make a last meal for my son and me. After we eat it, we'll die. Can't you just see by looking at me? Can't you just tell by my posture? Can't you see that I'm here only collecting enough firewood for one meal? Not enough for tomorrow, but just enough for today. In my state of fear, there isn't a tomorrow. There is only a right now. And I am getting firewood for right now. There hasn't been a tomorrow for a long time. And by the looks of it, that tomorrow isn't coming soon. So now we're going to eat this one last meal and die. This one last meal that you want to take from me. This one last meal that you want to take from my son. But God. I mean, did God not command Elisha to go and speak to this widow? It does say, then God spoke to him. Get up and go to Zarephath and live there. I've instructed a woman who lives there, a widow, to feed you. And does God not reward those who step out in courage? Do you think it made sense for Elijah to go to a foreign land and rely on a widow? Wouldn't there have been widows with where he was at? Why the leap to a foreign land? But no, go see this broke, bankrupt, worn-out widow with only a little flour to her name. God didn't say to Elijah, hey, I know this wealthy landowner. I've told him to feed you. It's going to be cool. Don't worry about it. No, he said, Elijah, I've instructed a widow to feed you. We have to remember, though, we serve a God of abundance. His math doesn't make sense to us. We just need to be courageous and rely on him. We just need to be courageous and trust him. And so in verse 13, Elijah said to her, don't worry about a thing. Go ahead and do what you've said, but first make a small biscuit for me and bring it back here. Then go ahead and make a meal from what's left for you and your son. This is the word of the God of Israel. The jar of flour will not run out, and the bottle of oil will not become empty before God sends rain on the land and ends this drought. The widow's at a crossroad. And so are all of us every time we come to a decision where we battle fear. Does she trust his God? Remember, she said, I swear as surely as your God lives. Do you trust God? Or do you trust fear to continue to drive you around? I mean, this woman may have been the bravest woman in all of the Bible. I mean, let's stop and think about it. She doesn't say, as surely as our God lives. No, she says, as surely as your God lives. This is a foreign land. She doesn't know that this is a God who gives you just what you need when you need it. She doesn't know of the miracles that God has worked for his people. She doesn't know what God did for his people when they were wandering around the wilderness in the book of Exodus. In fact, let's go there. Let's go to the book of Exodus. Exodus 16. When the whole community of Israel set out from Elim and journeyed into the wilderness of Sin, between Elim and Mount Sinai, they arrived there on the 15th day of the second month, 1 month after leaving the land of Egypt. 1 month after. There too, the whole community of Israel complained about Moses and Aaron. If only the Lord had killed us back in Egypt, they moaned. There we sat around pots filled with meat and ate all the bread we wanted. But now you have brought us into the wilderness to starve us all to death. Then the Lord said to Moses, look, I'm going to rain down food from heaven for you. Each day, people can go out and pick up as much food as they need for that day. But the widow doesn't know about that. The widow doesn't know about that provision. She doesn't know how God's people were starving to death in the wilderness, and he showed up. Yet here we are. What does the widow do? She takes a brave leap. She takes a step towards taking back those keys. What else does she have to do? She's courageous. She actually goes and does it. She actually listens to the stranger in these bizarre promises. Verse 15, and she went right off and did it. Did just as Elijah asked. She was courageous when she had no reason to be. She was courageous when there was zero sign of that fear being conquered. And it turned out as he said. Daily food for her and her family. The jar of meal didn't run out and the bottle of oil didn't become empty. God's promise fulfilled to the letter exactly as Elijah had delivered it. Did you hear that last line? That very last line? Let's revisit that very last line. It says, God's promise fulfilled to the letter exactly as Elijah had delivered it. This isn't Elijah's promise. This was God's promise. God promises us that when we step out of that constant state of fear and we act out of courage, he is the God of provisions and he alone. When we stop relying on ourselves, because boy, let's be honest, we've gotten it wrong time and time again. Maybe this time we ask fear to step out of the driver's seat. Maybe this time we take a stand. Maybe this time we seek the richness of the kingdom of God above and before all else. We've all been there. We've all been the widow. We all know what it's like to be down to just a little at the bottom of the jar. We all know what it's like to run low. We all know what it's like to experience a drought. We all know what it's like to run low on some money. We all know what it's like to be running a little low emotionally, spiritually, running a little low on time, running a little low on patience. We've all experienced that drought. We have all been there. The thing is, though, we can go through that and we don't have to turn to fear. We can go through that and we can be like the widow. We can go through that without sitting in the passenger seat, just looking at fear and letting it drive us around, feeling victimized and paralyzed to not knowing where you're going to go. I'm going to go ahead and invite our worship team out now. Remember when I told you that if there was a survival kit of emotion, fear would be in there? But what was right beside it? What was that emotion that was right next to fear? It was courage. And in Psalms 56, 3 through 4, it says, when I was afraid, when fear is driving me, I will trust in you. In God, whose word I praise. In God I trust. I will not be afraid. I will take back my keys, because what can a mortal man do to me? I'm going to go ahead and invite the worship team out now. Hey, guys. God, I know I'm experiencing a drought right now. I know the jar is running low. But I will no longer fear that. I will no longer worry about where that next something is coming from. I will be courageous. Lord, I will not let times of scarcity drive me around and take me places down roads I don't want to go. Instead, Lord, I'm taking back my keys. Today, Lord, I am taking my keys back from fear. I am telling fear, hey, get out of the driver's seat. It's my turn to drive again. It's my time to get back in the driver's seat. I'm tired of being the passenger. It's my time to listen to your word and trust in you, God. It's my time to finally let you, Lord, fill me up. It's time for me to find courage in you, Lord. It's time for me to no longer seek elsewhere, but only seek you, Lord. Let's worship.